After a few minutes, the happiness that Willow had spread between us was starting to fade. Longbow and I caught up to the others, and looked upon a humongous gear-shaped steel door that was set inside an even thicker steel frame. The letters EO were embossed upon it, in the center of the disc. The only clue that we had run into at all that this was what remained of the East Orchard facility. So, this is where we got stuck last time. Longbow said with a sigh, trotting over to a console set into the wall. The design was vaguely familiar, only having seen it once before in my life. It was a nearly identical door to the only stable I'd ever seen, only having the opportunity to do so because we stopped in the settlements near it on my trips to and from Paradise. The one question bubbling in my mind was, why would there be a stable door down here? Especially when just the server was supposedly kept below. You see, in order to get the power to the door, you need 3 specific keycards. Blue, yellow, and red keycards were each kept on the separate base program leaders, so that no one pony could open the door. Longbow said as she hoofed at the door control panel. Well, that sounds like a craptastic idea. Carlotta spoke up, folding her talons against her chest. What if one of them just killed the other 2 for the cards? I mean, I get that I'm not the smartest here, but that's so dumb that even I think it's a bad idea. Wow, now that I think of it, that was a pretty dumb idea. I mean, not to mention Bit could just print up 2 new cards anyway. Any pony could have gotten their hooves on all 3. Good job, pre-war planning. Well, it doesn't matter, seeing as the last time we were here, all we were missing was the red key card. She knocked her hoof on the card receptacle in frustration. I don't get it. We tore this place apart to find it, but it wasn't anywhere in the base. I have it here, I said as I sat down and hoofed through my saddlebags, pulling out all 3 cards. I just thought you were missing the blue one. But where'd you find it? She said, as she all but ripped them away from me with her magic, floating them over to her. And I still have the blue keycard from before. How did you get another one? The blue keycard's a long story, but Lemon had the red card, I stated as I shrugged. He what? Longbow shouted, a note of anger in her voice. But then why didn't he tell me? Why wouldn't he just open the door? She dropped the cards from her levitation, as I could see the rage build up inside of her. Maybe he found it while he was sabotaging the place, I suggested slowly, watching as that seemed to stem some of her frustration. He also left an audio log. Maybe he explained it on there, I offered as I sat down and brought the file up on my pip-buck. As the file started, the labored breathing of the middle-aged stallion came over the speakers. To any pony who finds this, my name is Star Paladin Lemon. If you've recovered this log, that means that I am dead, and that you must return this log to the Manhattan Steel Rangers, Alpha Base. There are sounds of him shifting around, followed by a deep groan of pain. Shit, that's bleeding pretty bad. Listen, whoever you are, you must warn them of Elder Strawberry Shorbert's plans to betray the Rangers. Tell them that they need to destroy this place before she can activate the server and gain access to the locations of the remaining Megaspell stocks. She plans on using them to wipe the surface clean. Whatever you do, do not reconnect the servers. Another heavy groan, shortened as it sounds like he hit himself. Fucking Medex isn't even helping anymore. I'm sorry to bring this to you, but this is of greatest importance. The survival of the wasteland depends on stopping her. If you're a Steel Ranger for Elder Sherbert, remember your oath. We were meant to save ponies, not destroy them. He's interrupted by a great coughing fit, ending as he wheezed heavily. One last thing. Find my daughter, Longbow, and get her out of Strawberry's base. Tell her that she should go to her mother. Tell her that I'm sorry for everything that I did. Tell her that I loved her. The recording gave a click as it ended. The silence seemed deafening, as none of us moved a muscle. Longbow, It was hard for me to find any words. I didn't know what to say. I shook it off as Longbow sat down with a thud, bringing the red piece of plastic up in front of her again. Why didn't you say something upstairs? She looked up at me, trying to push the pain she was feeling back as anger washed over her. That selfish son of a... She picked up all 3 cards and slammed them into the ports, with a yell of frustration, hoofing a lever up as the console hummed to life. A yellow warning light activated and spun on the wall as a loud alarm came from the set of hidden speakers. "What's happening?" Brass shouted loud enough for me to make it out. I shrugged and kept my eyes on the door. The sound of hydraulic pistons from behind it made me uncomfortable. What would we find behind it? The alarm stopped, and the light turned off as silence filled the air again. I was about to say something as another hydraulic system clacked against the back of this door, making me pause. We all covered our ears and gashed our teeth as the ear-splitting metallic squeal filled the room as the entire steel gear slid a few feet back and completely separated from the wall. A short blast of compressed air blew some of the dust back from the doorway before the large gear spun away to the right, revealing a large, empty, gray room. The bland space was maybe 20 by 20 feet wide, and maybe just as high. Its only feature was that a thin black pole with a set of yellow buttons on it was sticking out of the floor towards the back of the room. "That's it?" Carlotta huffed out unimpressed. "One hell of a door to just seal an empty room." I slowly walked forward into the room, looking at the set of buttons on the pedestal. The gears in my head threw me another idea. "I think this room is the elevator to level 5, I said, as I reached up and hoofed the bottom button, lighting it up momentarily before it dimmed and went out. An electrical hum filled the air. My mane and tail fluffed out as Longbow ran in after me, her mane raising up as a few short arcs of static crawled across her armor. A loud snap and bright flash disoriented me just long enough for Longbow's momentum to carry her into me, sending the 2 of us to the floor. I gasped as the heavy suit knocked the wind out of me, seeing spots in the blinding light that was receding from my vision. I smelled of burnt hair as I regained all my senses, looking around from under Longbow as she got off me with a blush. We had appeared inside what looked like a large warehouse. Rows and rows of unmarked wooden crates sat under the dim lighting. "Well, that was..." I spoke before the sheen of a metal object behind the top of one of the nearby rows caught my eye, piquing curiosity as I got up and trotted over to it. Longbow followed silently as I walked over towards the large object, coming into view of it as we rounded a few boxes. It was a large, light blue, reverse-joined, bipedal robot that seemed ridiculously well armed for its size. It stood approximately 10 feet tall, 2 stubby supports attached a round pod to each side of the vehicle. Each pod had a pair of what looked to be belt-fed anti-machine rifles sticking out of it, as well as an odd tube slung under each arm, but looked to hold a single rocket inside. Bold black writing was displayed along the blue lower half of its pod-shaped hull, sitting next to what must have been an arcane reactor's intake. Equestrian Defense, Prototype, number 209. "Wow, this thing is pretty heavy-duty," Longbow said softly as she walked around me, the small amount of amazement coming through the pain she was desperately trying to keep hidden. "You see how the leg joints extend past here? That would mean that this thing was built to handle a rubble-filled war zone." She looked up at the back of the robot. "That's interesting. It's powered by a pair of self-contained micro-spike reactors. This thing could probably run for almost as long as our armor is capable of." Her voice strained to keep the visage up as I tried to get her attention. "Longbow, please, tell me what's wrong," I said, as I held my hoof up, pulling her out of her own mind as she stopped walking. "I know you're in pain. I can hear it in your voice." I took a step forward as she frowned. I don't know what you're talking about, she said softly, her tone wavering slightly as she stared sadly at me. I just wanted to try to help her. So why was she trying to hide her feelings from me? She must have been seen me looking disappointed as she let out a sigh. You're right. It's written all over my face, isn't it? She finished her walk around the blue machine, walking up to me slowly. I didn't tell you Lemon's my father, because technically he isn't, she said with a small smile, her gaze drifting to the floor. My real father died when I was just a filly. Mom had just become a paladin when they gave her the news, so she did what any mare would have done, and buried herself in her work. A few years later, about when I was Brass's age, she and Lemon started to date and decided it would be best for both of them that they become each other's special sun ponies. A chance for her to feel normal, I guess. A rage grew in her voice every time she used his name. She gave out a forced laugh as she continued. So, I came back one day to find him beating my mother half to death for accidentally breaking some piece of tech, yelling at me that if I told anyone, he would kill her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I knew that some ponies were cruel, but that's just downright sadistic. So I did what any pony shouldn't have done. I charged straight at the fucker. She sighed and looked back at me. So, long story short, I got the crap beat out of me, and my mom shortly after transferred us out of the Manhattan contingent. We left his flank over at Delta Base, and I was glad I just wouldn't see that bastard again. If you transferred away, how is it that you were on a mission with him? I asked slowly. The crackling hum of the floor we had arrived on filled the air. Longbow looked over at it longingly, before squinting as the machine flashed, dropping Brass, Sky, and Carlotta on top of Brass's inactive armor. The whole group lay in a groaning heap. As Star Paladin of the Delta contingent, he requested that I be put on his team. Me just being an acolyte at the time, I couldn't refuse orders from that high up, she said as she walked towards the others, both metaphorically and literally walking away from going any deeper. What took you so long? And where's Willow? Sky pulled herself out of the pile, flung up a few feet in the air as she stretched her neck until it gave a soft pop. Well, those two weren't sure if you were both incinerated by the machine, while I maintained the entire time, mind you, that it was some sort of teleportation machine. Anyway, Willow said that she didn't mind going up top waiting for us, and that she would keep an eye out for the goddess. I think she's eager to try out your idea. She looked back down at the odd sphere teleportation floor. By the way, what is this machine anyway? I gave a little chuckle as I went to help Brass up. Well, technically, it's a thingy, I stated rather matter-of-factly, getting a knock on the back of my head by Carlotta as she floated past. It's a teleporter. That's all I've got on it. Celestia, there must be thousands of them. What do you think's inside all these boxes? Skyline asked as she spun in place, completely ignoring my response. I hope they're weapons. If so, this place is a gold mine, she said as she rubbed her forehooves together with a small smile. Let's find the server and then head back to collect our fee. No! Longbow shouted out. You can't do that. If you turn on the server, the wasteland will be destroyed. Skyline froze in the air before drooping her legs and looking over to me. Backlash. You can't seriously think that Strawberry Shortbird would do something as crazy as that. She crossed her hooves. What would she gain by mega-spelling the whole world another time? Skyline, you weren't in the same room as her. She's hiding something, and she is far from some pony I would call mentally stable, I said as I turned left and trotted down one of the rows. Now, every pony spread out, and look for a terminal that's still active. And no pony, I mean no pony, touch it till I get there. I took off at a gallop down the row, looking left and right as I heard the others all run off in their own directions. I hung a left at the end of the row and traveled along a short line of boxes before turning right to continue down another corridor. The gears in my head were slowly running from overuse as I tried to think about what I was going to do. I wouldn't be able to find where the pond is, but Pink and Bit will be trapped down here if I don't turn the server on. However, on the other hoof, if I do, Strawberry will gain access to the records of every remaining megaspell still stored in an Equestrian bunker, and who knows what kind of damage she'll do with them. Luna, why does everything have to be so hard? I yelled to myself as I skid to a stop at what seemed to be the back wall, turning left to start going again before I spotted a red, bulbous door that protruded from the side of it. I walked over to it, viewing through a clear glass window to see that it was the entrance to some small incline lift that rose up into the darkness. This must be the service tunnel lift Pink mentioned. The sound of hoofbeats coming closer drew my attention right, turning just in time to catch a glimpse of Longbow as she ducked around one row and dashed down another. I turned left and galloped down a couple of rows before turning down one randomly, nearly running headlong into a box that I had tripped over in the row. As I jumped over it, my ears perked as I heard Sky's voice calling out to me. I took a left at the junction, hoping that this maze would somehow lead me back to the teleportation pod. My eyes stung sharply as I quickly approached the center corner and took another right. I tried to skid to a stop as I stared straight into the smiling face of 42. I threw my shoulder forward as I realized I couldn't slow down in time and tried to slam her into the box on the shelf behind her. I passed straight through the image of the pink mare and slammed into the crate, my momentum driving it off the shelf it was on. It tipped on the floor and landed with a crack as I scrambled to turn around. My eyes were drawn to the light of the projector on one of the shelves at the end of the row, and it was silently displaying the image of the Ministry mares, projecting a standing rainbow dash after a few moments. I let out a sigh of relief as my heart stopped pounding away in my ribcage. I hiffed away at some of the broken timber of the box I had hit and clambered on top of it, stopping as a flash of gold caught my eye. Looking down into the crate, to see that it held a pony-sized golden rectangular box with an ornate-looking top. The lid of it had two Pegasi silhouettes facing each other. Their wings were outstretched in straight fashion, pointing towards the other Pegasi as they both knelt in reverence. Sky's voice interrupted me as I heard her call out again. I jumped down to the right and smiled as I saw Longbow galloping towards me across the aisle. I reached the end of my row first and turned left, pushing my hooves as fast as I could towards Sky as she hovered at the end of one of the rows. I could hear Longbow catching up as I reached the row, turning and barreling down as Carlotta swooped down above me. 50 caps says your mare friend beat you there, pudgy flank. She cooed as she smiled down to me. You're on, I yelled through my gasps, following Sky as she led us deeper, feeling as the power-armored hooves behind me shook the ground with each stomp. I grinned like an idiot as we were a few rows down, twisting and turning for what seemed like ever as we raced. I gasped in delight as I saw Brass standing next to a large metallic box with a number of pipes running out the sides of it, a bright green terminal screen in the center above a small keyboard. Looks like I started to gloat before my right hoof slipped, throwing me down hard and slamming me into the floor, sliding me along it in extremely poor fashion. I slid across it with a wet squeal as my momentum sent me slamming against the bottom of a metal box with a fleshy smack. Win. I finished as my flank flopped down, and I tried to catch my breath. I felt the cool breeze Carlotta's wings gave as she floated and landed next to me. I gotta say, I'm impressed, she said with actual astonishment. I would have commented, but I was content to just lay there and rest for a moment. Man, was I going to sleep well tonight? Oh yeah, and about that 50 caps. Just take it out of the paycheck you still owe me. My memory brought up my deal with Myron, reminding me that I still actually had Carlotta's contract. Shit, she was probably costing me a hoof and a leg. Ah well, she's worth it. The loud crack of Longbow's autoloader got my attention, making me jump to my hooves. Move out of the way, Backlash, she said sternly, lining her .308 rifle up with the server. I stood still as I looked over to her, meeting her determined eyes as she tried to keep her focus. No, I said with a stomp of my hoof. You can't destroy it. If I don't, then Strawberry Sherbert will destroy everything. She lowered her head and steadied herself for the shot. This is too important. The loud click of a pistol's hammer emanated next to Longbow as Carlotta pointed one of the IF-45 service pistols from home at her head. Backlash said, "You aren't destroying that server." "Carlotta, put your gun down," Skyline said as she flew between the two. "Can't we sort this out without threatening each other?" "Carlotta, back off." I snapped at her as well, making her go wide-eyed for a second before reaching back and dropping the gun into her saddlebag with a sigh. "Longbow, if you destroy this server, not only do we lose any chance to stay ahead of 42, but you are also dooming 2 innocent lives to an eternal hell." She cringed slightly before regaining her composure. "Can you live knowing that?" "What's the meaning of 2 lives compared to the fate of the entire wasteland?" She glared at me and spoke with a cold voice. "What about Lemon's sacrifice? By turning on that server, it will have been a meaningless death." "No. He died to make sure that you got out of here," I said as I sat down and struck my hoof out at her. "Hell. He gave me to you, and as long as you're alive, his death will never be meaningless." She shuddered as the words sunk in, lowering her battle saddle slightly. "I know the risks of turning the server on, but I need the fucking location of the pond to stop 42. I cringed and hoofed at my face as my eyes seemed to explode in pain. "That's correct!" The jubilant voice of the only mayor in the wasteland I didn't want to hear echoed through the warehouse. A metallic ping was all that preceded a small blue cylinder landing between Longbow and I, exploding with a small pop to spread a cloud of choking gas across the entire area. I gagged and choked on the thick smoke, stumbling forward as my eyes and lungs burned, nearly tripping over Longbow as she lay on the floor unconscious. "Huh, somehow immune to sleep gas. Good for you, Backlash." 42's voice echoed out of the shadows as the cloud cleared slowly. The loud report of a revolver was all I heard as the impact of the round was absorbed into the plate of my flak vest. The plate slammed into me hard, knocking me to the side and taking my breath away. "It seems you're still pretty weak. To good old-fashioned lead, though." I lay on the ground, gasping, as I heard her slowly walk towards me, trying to get back to my hooves as she came up from one of the rows. She now wore her mane flat, like the sad Pinky from my dreams. Her blue eyes were wide and seemed to study me over as she smiled her demented smile at me. I also noticed that she was now wearing the utility barding I had given her back at the bunker, probably for the sole reason just to taunt me. I started to push myself up slowly. I was about to activate SATs when she hoofed back the hammer on her gun, keeping it trained on me. You know better than that, Backlash." She twitched the gun to the side, instructing me to move to the side. I walked slowly as we circled each other, only stopping when she was in front of the server console. She kept her eyes locked on me as she reached to hoof back and input a series of commands as if it was second nature. The server hummed to life slowly as lines of code scrolled across the screen. "You know, I really do have you to thank for clearing a path right down here for me. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I was wrong about you. You're a lot tougher than I thought you'd be." She struck her free hoof onto one of the pockets in the barding, pulling out a small case of Mentols. "Fortitude was always a Pinkie Pie trait. Comes from working in the rock fields all day." She used her muzzle to open the box, licking it and chewing up a few tablets before shutting it and putting it back in her pocket. I watched as her pupils dilated, and she seemed to relax slightly. "I do have you to thank, Backlash, because without you, I couldn't enjoy party time menthols again. I just wish that the recipe wasn't attached to that annoying runt." A beep emanated from the terminal behind her, catching her attention. "Oh, and before I forget, it was a nice attempt to send me to Baltimore, trying to cover up for your actual destination. Something I'm sure the good ponies there will thank you for, as my loyal followers go to siege and raid their city." Celestia backlash. How could you have not seen that coming? I hoped that I could get a warning to them in time once I was out of here. I glanced about as she talked, looking over the sleeping forms of Longbow, Sky, and Carlotta, but wondered where Brass was. "Yes, I was wondering the same thing. Where did your Colt friend go?" 42 said haughtily. "Only, I know exactly where he is." She raised his pistol up to right and fired. Brass let out a yelp and fell off the top of one of the shelves, landing hard on the floor next to me. He bit his lip and squirmed as the bloody hole that punched into his cutie mark. "See, not so hard to find." I took a step towards him, freezing as 42 cocked the gun again and pointed it back to me. "Now, Backlash, would you kindly give me Twilight's 16-digit passcode? The sooner you do, the sooner we can part ways until our next happy reunion." She lowered her brow with a grin. "And don't bother lying to me if you want your friends here to live." "Fine. I'll give you the passcode," I said slowly, watching her smile widen. "But first, I want to know if Pallid is still alive." 42's smile dropped as a wave of frustration rolled across her expression. "The little cunt is more of a responsibility than I was prepared for. But yes, she's safe and sound somewhere you'll never be able to get her." I tensed up as she talked, watching her eyes as she noticed what I was doing, stiffening her hooves, hold on the gun. "Now then, the password." "Twilight Sparkle 1, I said with a smirk. She expects me to stand there and wait, and I'm done acting predictably. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as I burst forward at her, catching her off guard as she reflexively dropped her gun. I was done playing her games. I couldn't let her get to the pond, no matter the cost. I watched her swing her mane lightly as I charged. A metallic glint caught the light as I pushed off on my stride, jumping into the air as a small knife fell from her pink mane right into her hoof. I watched as she lifted her hoof towards me with a smile. Her body came down hard, the sharp blade piercing my skin painfully. But as much as I wasn't expecting her to pull a blade, she didn't anticipate my fused rib cage as the blade cut a line across my chest against the bone plate the Hydra had formed. The pain was excruciating, but she wasn't going to kill me like she thought. I slammed down into her, driving her against the server housing, with a metallic squeal as it crumpled in slightly. The next thing I heard was the most beautiful sound in the wasteland, even more so than hearing Willow sing my mother's song. 42 was screaming. Pure, uninhibited agony came from her muzzle as she scrambled out from under me, reaching to her gun as the smell of burning flesh and barding filled the air. I rolled off of her towards the silver revolver, feeling the same odd suction of it against my hoof as the party cannon had. I quickly got to my hooves and turned to face her, only to find that she was gone. My ears perked as I caught the sound of her hoofbeats heading away. I started off after her, stopping as Brass let out a loud whine. I looked down and glanced at the large pool of blood around him. Shit. He's bleeding fast and needs to get more radiation to close the wound. I dropped 42's revolver and bucked my saddlebags off and into the air, turning and catching up the hoop before flopping them over, dumping them onto the floor. A large amount of supplies and tools filled the room as they fell over onto the floor. The pieces of Brass's armor had he put there, falling out neatly. I grabbed his helmet with my hoof and shook it vigorously, hearing a piece of loose metal inside of it. I dug my hoof around it quickly, failing to find the irradiated metal that he kept inside. Fuck it. No time, he said quickly as I brought the helmet down hard onto his wounded flank, pressing it down and trying to seal it against him to get the radioactive metal close as he screamed in pain for a few moments. I made sure to keep my bleeding chest away from him as it dripped onto the floor. His squirming died down and he laid there, whimpering on the floor. "I'm sorry, Backlash. I tried," he said softly. I'm sorry. Without my armor, I'm useless. I sighed and pulled the helmet away, letting it roll a few feet away as the soft clicking of my pip-buck picked up to a good pace. His flank had nearly healed as I took a few steps back and sat down, using my hoof to try and apply pressure to the large gash that ran across my chest. You know, after the pain of the mutation, the gash didn't seem to hurt so bad. Brass, you're far from useless. Hell, I think you might have actually gotten her, had I not been so blatantly giving you away, I said, as I tried to comfort him, knowing full well that 42 probably had her own pinky sense telling her exactly where he was. But he needed to know that I needed him. Not to mention, you let me get the drop on her. Really? He asked softly as he sat up with a soft smile before he spotted the blood on my chest. Oh shit, hold on! He jumped up and nearly dove into Skyline's bags, levitating a health potion to me quickly. I took the bottle with my bloody hoof, surprised when the glass sizzled and warped, spilling the contents onto the floor below me. This whole blood thing is gonna take some getting used to, I said, as Brass drug his hoof into the saddlebags again, levitating another bottle out, opening it for me as I tilted my muzzle up. He tipped it over and poured the liquid over me sloppily, the magical fluid soaking into my chest, sealing up the wound only part way, before forming a layer of dark, scarred tissue over the rest. I looked down as he tossed the bottle aside, looking down at the oddly discolored line that stretched almost all the way across my chest. Well, I guess health potions just have the same oomph that they did before the mutation. I don't know. I think it makes you look more masculine, he said without thinking, drawing my attention as he blushed and gave me a nervous grin. Not to say that you weren't super masculine or something. I laughed and gave him a small smile, interrupted suddenly as a frustrated scream resonated from somewhere in the warehouse. Next time, Backlash! 42's voice screamed out, before the sound of the teleportation pad fired off silenced it. I let 42's agony sink in, as Brass gave out a small laugh. So, I'm confused. Did we win for once? You know what? I sighed and nodded, as I looked into the terminal, slowly punching in Twilight's password to reboot the server. I'll say it's close enough. I hovered the return button, watching as the command prompt returned. Bit transfer in progress. Level up. Plus 10 repair, plus 5 small guns. New quest perk. Uncanny mutation. While you might not be a superhero, your body has undergone a change to give your blood acidic properties and allows your injuries to be used in its advantage. Blood that coats armor reduces its damage tolerance by a maximum of 5, and blood that touches a bare pony causes 5 points of damage per second for 15 seconds. New perk, Love Machine. Your experience in dealing with different artificial systems allows you to find the sweet spot in their coding to get what you need. You gain new dialogue options when speaking with any system that has a basic intelligence system or above.